Have you ever felt like your family is falling apart, no matter how hard you try to make things work? Broken relationships, misunderstandings, and unmet expectations can make it feel like restoration is impossible. But what if the key to healing your family lies in the teachings of Jesus? Jesus didn't just offer salvation for our souls. He also showed us the way to restore broken relationships. In the Gospel of Matthew 18:21-22, Jesus teaches us about the power of forgiveness, saying, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times." Jesus calls us to forgive, to love unconditionally, and to serve one another in humility, even when it's difficult. Think about the relationships in your own life. What if, instead of giving up or holding on to bitterness, you applied the principles of forgiveness, grace, and unconditional love that Jesus taught? What could change in your family if you followed his example? Jesus' teachings remind us that no matter how far we've drifted or how much pain we've endured, there is always hope for restoration. The road to healing starts with us choosing to love and forgive, just as Christ loves and forgives us. Write in the comments, "Healing begins with love." Udri, this action represents the choice to restore relationships through love and forgiveness. If you haven't subscribed yet, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss any content. Let's get started. Number 1. The power of forgiveness heals family wounds. Have you ever been hurt by someone you love? A parent, a sibling, a spouse, or even a child? That pain, it cuts deep, doesn't it? The weight of it lingers, and sometimes it feels like it might never go away. You try to move on, but the wound is still there, throbbing, reminding you of the hurt, of the betrayal, of the words that were said, of the actions that shattered trust. You wonder, how could I ever forgive this? How can I ever move forward when the pain feels too much to bear? But here's the truth we often don't want to hear. Jesus teaches us that the way to heal family wounds is through forgiveness. It's not just about letting go of the past. It's about freeing yourself from the chains of hurt that keep you stuck in bitterness, resentment, and anger. This is not just a suggestion. It's the way of Christ. It's his answer to our deepest wounds, the way he showed us how to move past the hurt. But how do we forgive? How do we let go of the pain that cuts so deeply? Let's start by remembering the words of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, where he says, "For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins." Matthew 6:14-15. Do you feel that weight? Jesus is telling us that the forgiveness we offer to others is directly linked to the forgiveness we receive from God. In other words, to experience the healing God has for us, we must first extend that same forgiveness to those who have hurt us. Forgiveness is not a magic wand that erases the pain. It's not something that happens overnight, but it is a choice. It's a decision to release someone from the debt they owe you, whether it's the debt of unkind words, broken trust, or betrayal. Jesus doesn't tell us that forgiveness will be easy or quick, but he does promise that it is necessary for healing. Without it, the wounds remain, festering and deepening, keeping us from the peace that only he can give. I know it sounds impossible, doesn't it? How do you forgive someone who doesn't deserve it? How do you forgive when you still feel the sting of their actions? But what if forgiveness isn't about the other person? What if it's about you? Jesus invites us to forgive, not just for the sake of the person who hurt us, but for our own sake. Forgiveness frees us from the grip of anger and pain that holds us captive. It doesn't excuse the wrongdoing. It doesn't erase the hurt. But it releases us from being controlled by it. Jesus models this for us, doesn't he? On the cross, after being betrayed, abandoned, and mocked, he looks at those who did this to him, and in Luke 23:34 he says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Can you imagine that kind of forgiveness? In the face of such cruelty, Jesus offers grace, and he invites us to do the same in our own lives. Think about it. What would happen in your family if you chose forgiveness, even when it was hard? What would happen if you stopped holding on to the bitterness and instead let go of the pain? I know it's not easy, but I believe with all my heart that it's worth it. Forgiveness opens the door to healing. It restores the relationships that seem beyond repair. It doesn't mean that everything goes back to the way it was. It doesn't mean there aren't consequences for actions. But it does mean that the chains of bitterness no longer bind you. I remember hearing a story once about a woman who had been deeply hurt by her mother. The wounds were old, decades old, but every time she thought about her mother, she felt the anger, the resentment, the hurt. It was as if she had never moved on. One day, in a moment of prayer, she felt God gently nudging her heart. She heard the words, "Let it go." At first she resisted. She couldn't. Her mother had been cruel, selfish, and unkind. She felt justified in her anger, but slowly, the weight of the words, "Let it go," began to sink in. She realized that she had been holding on to the hurt, and in doing so, she was letting it control her life. She wasn't free, she wasn't healed, so she made the choice to forgive. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but over time, her heart began to heal. She was no longer held captive by her mother's actions. She was free. That's what forgiveness does. It frees us. It doesn't change the past, but it changes us. It releases us from the power of the hurt and gives us the ability to move forward. And that is what God wants for you. He wants you to experience the healing that comes from forgiving, even when it feels impossible. In Colossians 3:13, Paul writes, "Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you." There it is again, the standard. We forgive as the Lord forgave us. Jesus didn't wait for us to get our act together before he forgave us. He didn't wait for us to apologize or make things right. He forgave us freely, sacrificially, and unconditionally. And that is the model he sets for us in our relationships with others. As we choose forgiveness, we are stepping into the freedom that Jesus offers us. It's not a freedom that denies the hurt. It's not a freedom that says, "It didn't matter." Oh no, it's a freedom that says, "I'm not going to let this pain control me any longer." Jesus calls us to live in the freedom of forgiveness. He calls us to let go of the past and embrace the new life he offers. He calls us to heal our family wounds with the same grace and mercy that he showed us. And this healing doesn't just stop with you. When you forgive, you not only heal your own heart, but you begin the process of healing your family. Forgiveness is contagious. It spreads. When one person in a family chooses to forgive, it has the power to change the atmosphere, to change the dynamics, and to invite healing into the entire family. It might take time. It might require patience and persistence. But as you forgive, you are paving the way for reconciliation and restoration. There's no magical formula for forgiveness. It's a choice you make every day. It's a decision you make in the face of the hurt. And sometimes it's a choice you have to make more than once. But as you choose to forgive, you are following in the footsteps of Jesus, who forgave us when we didn't deserve it, and who offers us healing and hope. So, I ask you today, what do you need to forgive? Who in your life do you need to release from the debt they owe you? It may not be easy, but with God's help it is possible. And as you forgive, you will begin to experience the peace and healing that only He can give. Don't let the hurt control you any longer. Let go and let God heal your heart, restore your family, and set you free. Number 2, love that transforms brokenness. Have you ever felt like your love wasn't enough? Maybe you've loved deeply, you've tried with all your heart, but it just seemed like nothing could mend the brokenness that lingered in your family. The fights, the misunderstandings, the disappointment, the exhaustion, it all seems like too much. You pour yourself into relationships, hoping for a breakthrough, yet the hurt keeps piling up, making everything feel more fragile. So you wonder, does love really have the power to heal? Can it truly transform a family that's been broken for so long? Let me tell you this, yes, it can. But the love that transforms isn't the kind we often think of. It's not a love that depends on feelings or circumstances. It's not the kind of love that says, "I'll love you if you love me back." No, the love that transforms families, the love that heals, is the kind of love that Jesus showed us. It's sacrificial, unconditional, and unyielding. It's a love that refuses to give up, even when things seem hopeless. It's the kind of love that's willing to pour itself out for the sake of others, even when it costs something. Jesus speaks of this kind of love in John 13:34-35 when he says, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." The depth of this love is staggering. Jesus doesn't just tell us to love our families the way we want to be loved. He calls us to love them the way he has loved us. Think about that for a moment. Jesus, who loved us so much that he laid down his life for us, is asking us to extend that same sacrificial love to those around us, especially those closest to us. And when we do, something miraculous happens. We begin to see transformation. The love of Jesus is a healing love. It is a love that speaks to the deep places of pain, the places of rejection, the places where we feel unworthy, and says, "You are accepted, you are loved, you are enough." Jesus' love doesn't just fix things on the surface, it gets to the heart of the matter. It doesn't simply cover over the cracks, it heals them from the inside out. And that is the kind of love we are called to show our families. The love that heals brokenness is not superficial, it's transformative. It doesn't hide the pain, it confronts it, works through it, and ultimately heals it. I know this is easier said than done. It's easy to say, love your family, but when you've been hurt or when trust has been broken, it can feel like an impossible task. Maybe you've been betrayed by someone you love deeply, spouse, child, parent, and now love seems like a distant dream. How can you love someone who has hurt you so badly? How can you extend the kind of love Jesus calls you to when your heart is full of pain and disappointment? This is where we have to remember that Jesus didn't just teach us about love, he showed us. On the cross, after being abandoned, rejected, and mocked, he looks at the people who caused his suffering and says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Luke 23:34. That's the love we're talking about. It's the kind of love that doesn't wait for people to get it right before it acts. It's the kind of love that loves even in the face of rejection, even in the face of betrayal. Jesus loved us when we were unlovable, and he calls us to do the same. In Romans 5:8, Paul writes, "But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. While we were still broken, still lost, still in our sin, God's love reached out to us. It didn't wait for us to fix ourselves. It didn't wait for us to clean up our act. It loved us right where we were. And that's the kind of love that can heal a family, the kind of love that loves people for who they are, not for what they've done. The kind of love that says, "You don't have to be perfect for me to love you, because God's love for me has made me whole." This love doesn't mean ignoring the hurt. It doesn't mean pretending like everything is okay when it's not. It means choosing to love in the midst of the pain. It means showing up even when it's hard. It means offering grace, even when you feel like you've given all the grace you have. And over time, this love will begin to change things. It will soften hearts. It will break down walls. It will heal wounds. I've seen this kind of love transform families. I've seen relationships that seemed beyond repair begin to heal, not because of a magic formula or a quick fix, but because someone chose to love, even when it was hard. Love doesn't always change the situation overnight, but it changes the heart. It softens the soul. And when that happens, real transformation can begin. Think about a time when you've experienced love that changed you. Maybe it was someone who loved you when you didn't deserve it. Maybe it was a parent who never gave up on you, a friend who stuck by your side when you were at your lowest, or a spouse who forgave you when you failed. That kind of love leaves a mark. It changes you. And it's the same kind of love that can change your family. But the love that transforms isn't just for the easy moments. It's not just for when things are going well. It's the love that shows up in the mess, in the brokenness, in the moments when you feel like giving up. That's the love that Jesus shows us. That's the love he calls us to offer to our families. And that's the love that has the power to heal the wounds, restore what's been broken, and bring new life to what seemed lost. It may not be easy, and it may not come quickly, but as you choose to love the way Jesus loves, you will begin to see transformation. You will begin to see the walls that have been built up in your family start to crumble. You will begin to see the scars of the past fade away as the power of love works its way through every relationship. And that love, it's never just a feeling, it's a choice to give yourself, your heart, and your time to those who need it most, a choice to forgive, to heal, and to build. Jesus shows us that love isn't something we wait for, it's something we give. And when we give that love, it has the power to transform everything around us. So today, I want to challenge you to choose that kind of love, even in the moments when it feels impossible, even when it feels like your love isn't enough. Choose the love that transforms. Choose the love that Jesus showed us, the love that heals, the love that never gives up. It's a love that has the power to heal the brokenness in your family. It's the love that makes all things new, and it's the love that will never fail. Number 3, leading with humility restores harmony. Have you ever found yourself in the middle of an argument, your heart pounding, your mind racing, and you realize you're not even listening anymore? All you want is to be heard, to be understood, to be right. We've all been there. Family dynamics can bring out the best and the worst in us. We get caught in the cycle of pride, defensiveness, and self-righteousness, and before we know it, we've created a rift that feels impossible to heal. But what if I told you that the key to restoring peace in your family isn't about being right? It's not about proving your point or standing your ground. What if the key to healing your family wounds is humility? In the world today, humility is often seen as weakness. But in the eyes of Jesus, humility is the strength that binds families together. Jesus calls us to lay down our pride and serve one another, especially in the most difficult of relationships. It's not about thinking less of yourself, but about thinking of yourself less. When we lead with humility, we create space for understanding, reconciliation, and peace to take root in our relationships. But how do we do this? How do we lead with humility in the midst of family struggles? Jesus himself is the perfect example of humility. Think about the moment in the Gospel of John when he washes his disciples' feet. He, the Son of God, the King of the universe, kneels down to wash the feet of his disciples. In John 13:14-15, he says, "Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." Jesus shows us that humility is about serving others, even when you're the one who deserves to be served. It's about putting others before yourself, even when it feels uncomfortable. In our families, this kind of humility creates a spirit of cooperation rather than competition. It dissolves pride and creates a place where everyone's voice matters. Jesus doesn't just ask us to be humble, he shows us how to live it out through his actions. Think about a time when you felt someone humble themselves before you. Maybe it was a parent who apologized for something they had done wrong, or a sibling who admitted their mistake and asked for forgiveness. There's a softness in that moment, isn't there? It's as if the tension melts away, and all of a sudden there's room for healing. That's what humility does. It clears away the walls of defensiveness and pride and makes space for connection. In Philippians 2:3-4, Paul urges us, Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. This is the way of Jesus. It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about caring for one another more than we care about being right. It's about lowering ourselves to raise others up. Humility doesn't just fix arguments, it changes the whole dynamic of the relationship. When we start valuing others above ourselves, we invite peace into our homes. We invite unity into our families. Humility also requires a willingness to listen. How often do we find ourselves talking over others, insisting that we know best, or pushing our own agenda? But Jesus teaches us that true leadership in the family, whether it's as a parent, a spouse, or a child, is about listening, understanding, and responding with grace. In James 1:19, we're reminded, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. In family relationships, so often we think that the louder we speak, the more we'll be heard. But in truth, it's in the quiet, humble listening that true connection is made. I remember a moment when a family member came to me, not to argue, but to listen. They sat down, looked me in the eye, and said, "I want to understand what you're feeling." In that moment, I felt seen, I felt heard. That humility, that willingness to lay aside their own perspective and seek mine, softened my heart. It changed everything. Humility doesn't require grand gestures. Sometimes it's the simple act of being present and listening that restores harmony in the most profound way. Humility also means recognizing that we are all imperfect. We all have flaws. We all make mistakes. And when we can acknowledge that in ourselves, we can approach others with more compassion and understanding. Instead of blaming or pointing fingers, humility allows us to say, "I too have failed. I too am in need of grace." It's that kind of vulnerability that opens the door to healing in families. In 1 Peter 5:5-6, we read, "In the same way, you who are younger, submit yourselves to your elders. All of you, clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, because God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time." Humility isn't just about how we treat others, it's also about recognizing our need for God's grace. When we humble ourselves before him, we invite his healing power into our families. We allow him to work in ways that we cannot, and in due time, he lifts us up, restoring what was broken. Now, I know this isn't easy. Humility isn't something that comes naturally to us. It's countercultural. The world tells us to look out for ourselves, to protect our own interests, to make sure our voices are heard. But Jesus turns that worldview upside down. He tells us that the way to healing, the way to restore harmony in our families, is through humility. It's through the willingness to serve, to listen, to value others above ourselves. So, where do you start? It begins with a choice. The next time you're in the middle of a disagreement or a difficult conversation, stop and ask yourself, how can I serve this person right now? How can I listen, understand, and value their perspective? It's in those moments of humility that relationships are restored. It's in those moments that pride is broken and peace is made. Humility isn't a one-time act. It's a lifestyle. It's about consistently choosing to put others first, to serve, to listen, and to seek understanding. When we do this, we create an environment where harmony can thrive. And that's what Jesus wants for our families. He wants us to live in peace, in understanding, in love, and he has shown us the way. Through his example, we see that humility is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. It is through humility that families are restored, healed, and made whole. So let's lead with humility and watch as God works to restore harmony in our homes. Number 4, how to break the cycle of hurt. Have you ever felt like you're stuck in a never-ending cycle of pain, unable to break free? Maybe it's the same argument over and over, or a constant feeling of disappointment and frustration. It's exhausting, isn't it? You try to forgive, you try to move on, but the same hurt keeps coming back like a record stuck on repeat. Whether it's in your marriage, with your children, or with a sibling, the wounds feel deep and relentless. It's as if you're forever caught in a loop of hurt where healing seems impossible. But here's the good news. You don't have to stay stuck in that cycle. Jesus teaches us how to break free from the hurt, and it starts with understanding the power of choosing healing over bitterness. It's not about pretending the hurt doesn't exist. It's not about pretending that the pain is gone. No, breaking the cycle of hurt begins with the decision to move toward healing, even when it feels uncomfortable or impossible. We see this in the way Jesus handled offenses and wounds. He didn't deny the pain of the world, but he always offered a way forward. When Peter asked Jesus how many times he should forgive someone, thinking that forgiving 7 times was enough, Jesus answered in Matthew 18:22, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. In other words, there's no limit to forgiveness. It's not about counting the wrongs. It's about choosing to release the debt, to let go of the hurt, and to move forward in freedom. Now, I know what you're thinking, but it's too much. The hurt is too deep. How can I possibly forgive and move on when the wounds are so fresh? Jesus knows the weight of deep hurt. He knows what it's like to be betrayed, to be falsely accused, to be abandoned by those he loved most. Yet in the face of all of that, he chose to forgive, and he offers us the same grace to do the same in our families. Forgiveness isn't for the other person, it's for you. It's the key to breaking the cycle of hurt. In Colossians 3:13, we are called to bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. This forgiveness isn't easy. It's not a simple, "I forgive you," and then forgetting about it. Forgiveness takes time, effort, and a willingness to let go of the right to hold on to anger. But when we do, it's like breaking a chain that has bound us for so long. It doesn't mean we forget the pain. It means we choose to not let the pain define us any longer. We choose to move forward, even if the steps are small. But forgiveness alone doesn't break the cycle. It's not just about saying, "I forgive," and expecting everything to change. Forgiveness must be followed by intentional steps toward healing. It requires vulnerability. It requires trust. It requires effort. And it requires an openness to God's power to restore what has been broken. Let's look at the story of Joseph in the Bible. Joseph was sold by his own brothers into slavery, betrayed in ways most of us can't imagine. He spent years in hardship, falsely accused, and left to rot in prison. But when the time came and his brothers stood before him, desperate and asking for his help, Joseph didn't seek revenge. In Genesis 50:20, he tells them, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Joseph understood that forgiveness and healing were not just about letting go of the past. It was about seeing God's greater purpose in it all. Joseph's choice to forgive his brothers didn't just break the cycle of hurt for him, it broke it for his entire family. The pain they had caused him could have perpetuated a cycle of revenge and bitterness, but Joseph's act of forgiveness set a new path for reconciliation. He chose to see God's hand in his story, even in the midst of the deepest hurt. The same can be true for us. When we choose to forgive, we are breaking the cycle of hurt, not just for ourselves, but for our families. We're choosing a new path, one of healing, restoration, and grace. It's a decision to stop passing the pain on to the next generation. It's a decision to stop letting hurt define our relationships. But forgiveness isn't always easy. Sometimes we need to invite God into the process. It's easy to forgive when the hurt is small or when the person who hurt us is apologizing. But what do we do when the pain is too deep? What do we do when the person who hurt us isn't sorry, or when we don't feel like they deserve forgiveness? This is where the healing power of God comes in. In 2 Corinthians 5:17, Paul reminds us, "Therefore, If anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone. The new is here. When we choose forgiveness, we are choosing to walk in the new creation that Christ offers us. The old hurts, the old patterns of bitterness and anger no longer have to control us. Through Christ, we can break the cycle of hurt and step into a new way of living, one that's marked by grace, mercy, and peace. It's important to remember that breaking the cycle of hurt doesn't mean everything will be fixed overnight. Sometimes healing is a process, and that's okay. It's okay if you don't feel like everything is perfect right away. The journey of forgiveness takes time, and sometimes there are more steps to take than we expect. But with each step, we are moving toward healing, moving toward freedom, and moving toward the restoration God promises. When we decide to break the cycle of hurt, we are also choosing to break the generational chains that may have held our families captive. It's easy to pass down patterns of anger, bitterness, and unforgiveness. But by choosing healing, we change the story for our children, for our grandchildren, and for generations to come. We create a new legacy, one of grace and healing, one that doesn't pass the pain down, but passes the love of Christ down. There's power in choosing to break the cycle of hurt. It's not always easy and it doesn't happen quickly, but when we choose to forgive, when we choose to heal, we are opening the door for God to restore what has been broken. We are giving Him room to work in our families, to mend relationships, and to bring about true peace. So today, ask yourself, what cycle of hurt do you need to break? Where do you need to forgive? And where do you need to choose healing? The power is in your hands, and with God's help you can break free from the cycle and step into the new life He has for you. Number 5. The strength of patience in family healing. Have you ever found yourself running out of patience when trying to heal a relationship? Maybe you've been putting in the effort to rebuild trust, to restore love, to forgive, and yet it feels like nothing is changing. You've tried, you've prayed, you've hoped, but the progress is slow. Sometimes it seems like the hurt is too deep, the walls too high, and the time too long. Patience. It's a word we all know well, but it's a word that can feel impossible to practice when we're in the midst of family conflict and pain. It's one thing to be patient when everything is going well. It's another thing entirely when things are broken and the healing process feels like it's dragging on. But here's the truth. Patience is one of the greatest strengths we can have in the process of healing. It's not about passive waiting. It's about actively choosing to remain steadfast in faith and love, even when the road is tough. Patience is a vital ingredient in the restoration of our families. Without it, we might rush to judgment, give up too soon, or become frustrated with the pace of healing. But with patience, we allow God to work in His timing, not ours. The Bible is full of reminders about the importance of patience, especially when it comes to relationships. James 5:7 to date tells us, "Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near." Just as the farmer waits for the crops to grow, we must wait for the healing in our families to take root. It doesn't happen overnight, it takes time. But we are called to trust in God's timing and to stand firm in patience as He works in our hearts and the hearts of our loved ones. Patience isn't about sitting idly by and hoping things get better. It's about continuing to show up, continuing to love, continuing to forgive, even when it feels like nothing is changing. It's about trusting that even when we can't see the progress, God is working in ways that we can't understand. There's a verse in Isaiah 55:9 that says, "As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." When we're in the midst of the hurt, it's hard to see the bigger picture. But God is working in ways we cannot see, and patience is the key to trusting that He is at work, even when we don't feel it. Think about the story of Job. Job's life was turned upside down. He lost his wealth, his health, and his family. And in the midst of his suffering, his friends came and told him that it must be his fault. Job had every reason to be impatient, every reason to give up. Yet despite everything, Job chose to remain faithful. He didn't understand what was happening, but he trusted that God knew what he was doing. Job's story wasn't a quick fix. It wasn't a wait for a moment and everything will be fine type of healing. It was a long, painful journey. But at the end of it, God restored everything Job had lost, and more. In Job 42:10 it says, "After Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before." Job's patience in his suffering led to restoration, not just for him, but for those around him as well. In the same way, our patience in the midst of family struggles has the potential to bring about healing, not just for us, but for everyone involved. Patience doesn't mean we're sitting around waiting for something to happen. It means we're trusting God's timing. We're praying, we're forgiving, we're loving, and we're waiting on His perfect plan to unfold. We also need to remember that patience is not just for us, it's for others as well. The process of healing in families often involves more than one person. When you're waiting for someone else to change or waiting for someone else to heal, it can be frustrating. But think about how much patience God has shown toward us. In 2 Peter 3:9 it says, "The Lord is not slow in keeping His promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, He is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance." God's patience toward us is immense. He doesn't give up on us, even when we fall short, even when we're slow to change. And in the same way, we are called to be patient with those in our families, trusting that God is working in them just as He is working in us. Patience also involves understanding that healing doesn't happen in a straight line. There will be setbacks. There will be difficult moments, there will be days when it feels like you're right back where you started, but that's part of the process. Healing isn't linear, it's messy. But with each step, no matter how small, we move closer to the restoration God has promised. Think about how Jesus taught His disciples patience. In Luke 9:51-56, when Jesus was rejected by a Samaritan village, His disciples wanted to call down fire from heaven to destroy the people who had rejected them. But Jesus rebuked them. He didn't let their impatience lead to destruction. He showed them a better way, a way of grace and patience. Jesus didn't rush to judgment. He didn't retaliate. Instead, He chose to continue on the journey, trusting that God's timing would be perfect. This is the kind of patience that we need in our families. It's the patience that says, "I will not give up. I will not retaliate. I will continue to love, continue to forgive, continue to trust, no matter how long it takes." This kind of patience is a reflection of God's love for us. It's a love that endures, that doesn't give up, that doesn't quit, even when the process is long and difficult. I know this is a hard message to hear when you're in the middle of pain. It's easy to become impatient when the hurt feels fresh, when the relationship feels broken beyond repair. But remember this, God's healing doesn't come on our timetable. His ways are higher than ours. His timing is perfect, and He is working in your family, even when you don't see it. So, take a deep breath. Keep going. Keep praying. Keep showing up. God's healing power is at work, and though the process may take time, it will lead to restoration. Patience is not a passive waiting. It's an active trust in God's plan, an active hope in His promises. And in the end, it will be worth it. Your family will be healed, your relationships will be restored, and you will see that God's patience with you has made all the difference in your journey of healing. Number 6, rebuilding trust after betrayal. Have you ever felt the devastating sting of betrayal? Maybe it came from someone you trusted deeply, a spouse, a parent, or a close friend. The person who promised to love and protect you turned their back, and suddenly everything you thought was solid has been shattered. Trust, once broken, can feel impossible to rebuild. The hurt lingers, and you wonder if things will ever be the same again. Can the foundation of your relationship ever be restored, or is it forever damaged by the betrayal? Rebuilding trust after betrayal is one of the hardest things we can do, but it is also one of the most powerful acts of healing and grace. Jesus teaches us that even after the deepest hurts, there's a path forward. There is hope for restoration, even when trust seems beyond repair. It's not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight, but with God's help, trust can be rebuilt and relationships can be restored. One of the most powerful examples of trust and betrayal in the Bible comes from the life of Peter. Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples, denied Jesus 3 times after his arrest. Peter had promised Jesus that he would never deny him, yet when the pressure was on, he did exactly that. He betrayed his Lord in his most vulnerable moment. Can you imagine the weight of that guilt and shame Peter must have felt? The one he had followed, the one he had trusted, was now gone. And Peter's trust in himself and in the relationship he thought he had with Jesus was broken. But here's the beautiful part. Jesus didn't leave Peter in his shame. In John 21:15-17, after his resurrection, Jesus offers Peter a chance to rebuild their relationship. Jesus asks Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" And each time Peter responds, Jesus tells him to feed his sheep. Jesus was giving Peter the opportunity to restore the trust that had been broken. He wasn't condemning him. He was inviting him back into the fold, offering him grace and forgiveness. This is the heart of Jesus. He doesn't write us off when we fail. He doesn't abandon us when we make mistakes. Instead, he reaches out with open arms, offering grace, forgiveness, and the chance to rebuild. In the same way, we are called to rebuild trust in our families after betrayal. It's not easy. It takes time, effort, and a willingness to forgive. But it is possible. So how do we rebuild trust after betrayal? The first step is forgiveness. It's choosing to release the other person from the debt they owe us, not because they deserve it, but because we are commanded to forgive. In Matthew 18:21-22, Peter asks Jesus how many times he should forgive someone who sins against him, and Jesus answers, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times." Forgiveness is the first step in rebuilding trust. Without it, the relationship cannot heal. But forgiveness is not the end, it's the beginning. It opens the door for the healing process to begin. The second step in rebuilding trust is honesty. If trust has been broken, it's important to be open and honest about the hurt. This means being vulnerable, sharing the pain, and acknowledging the damage that has been done. In Ephesians 4:25, Paul writes, "Therefore each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body." Trust cannot be rebuilt without honesty. It requires transparency, even when it's uncomfortable. It requires both parties to be willing to confront the issues head-on and to communicate openly and truthfully. The third step is time. Rebuilding trust doesn't happen in an instant. It's a process that takes time, and it requires consistent effort. Trust is rebuilt through small, everyday actions. It's about showing up, being dependable, and proving through actions that the relationship is worth investing in. It's easy to say, "I'm sorry," but trust is rebuilt through sustained change. In 1 Corinthians 13:7, Paul tells us that love always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Rebuilding trust requires patience, perseverance, and a willingness to keep working toward healing, even when it feels hard. The fourth step is grace. Just as Jesus offered Peter grace after his betrayal, we are called to extend grace to those who have hurt us. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul writes, "But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness.'" Grace doesn't deny the hurt, it acknowledges it, but grace chooses to extend forgiveness anyway. It's not about forgetting what happened or pretending that it didn't matter. It's about choosing to forgive and move forward, knowing that God's grace is enough to cover the brokenness. But rebuilding trust doesn't just mean forgiving and offering grace to others. It also means taking responsibility for our own actions. If we've been the ones who have hurt others, we must be willing to own our mistakes and seek forgiveness. Trust is a two-way street. It requires both parties to be willing to work toward restoration. In James 5:16 we are told, "Therefore confess your sins to each other and pray for each other so that you may be healed." Healing begins with repentance, acknowledging our wrongs and seeking reconciliation. Rebuilding trust also means setting boundaries. Trust doesn't mean that everything goes back to the way it was. Sometimes rebuilding trust requires establishing new boundaries to protect the relationship and ensure that the same mistakes aren't repeated. In Matthew 18:15, Jesus gives us a guideline for confronting someone who has wronged us. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. Boundaries help rebuild trust by ensuring that the relationship is healthy and that both parties feel safe and respected. I know that rebuilding trust after betrayal is not easy. It's a long road, and there will be setbacks along the way. But with God's help, it's possible. Trust is not just restored by words, it's restored through actions. It's through consistent, heartfelt effort, through forgiveness, honesty, grace, and time that trust can be rebuilt. And when it is, the relationship becomes stronger, more resilient, and more beautiful than before. Just as Jesus restored his relationship with Peter, he offers us the chance to restore our relationships, to rebuild what has been broken, and to experience healing. So, if trust has been broken in your family, don't give up hope. Take the first step toward rebuilding. Forgive, be honest, be patient, extend grace, and trust that God will help you rebuild what has been lost. He is the great restorer, and with him all things are possible. Number 7, the role of compassion in family renewal. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like you couldn't even look at the person? We convince ourselves that if we just distance ourselves enough, we'll stop feeling the pain. But the truth is, no wall we build can protect us from the pain forever. Eventually, it will spill out into our relationships, leaving us more isolated, more bitter, and more broken. So, what's the solution when family wounds feel too deep and the hurt feels like it might never go away? Compassion. Compassion is not just about feeling sorry for someone. It's about seeing them as a person, understanding their pain, and being willing to step into their world, even when you've been hurt. Compassion goes beyond sympathy. It's not just about saying, "I'm sorry you're going through that," and moving on. It's about walking alongside someone, sharing in their pain, and offering them grace, even when they may not deserve it. It's the kind of love that heals broken hearts and restores fractured families. Jesus demonstrated compassion in ways that are both powerful and humbling. One of the clearest examples of Jesus' compassion is in the story of the prodigal son. The younger son asked for his inheritance early, ran off, and squandered it on reckless living. He ended up broken alone, feeding pigs, and feeling utterly worthless. But when he returned home, his father saw him from a distance, ran to him, and embraced him. The father didn't lecture him. He didn't say, "I told you so." Instead, he showed him compassion, welcoming him home with open arms. In Luke 15:20 it says, "So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him." The father's compassion was not based on the son's actions. It was based on the love he had for him. No matter how far the son had fallen, the father's heart was always open. This is the kind of compassion Jesus calls us to show in our families. It's not about waiting for someone to get their act together before we extend kindness. It's about seeing the person, not just the hurt, and choosing to love them despite their failures. In our families, we are often faced with situations where we have been wronged, where people have hurt us deeply. But if we want to experience healing and renewal, we must choose to show compassion, just as the Father did for his Son. Compassion is the antidote to resentment. It's the balm for the wounds that divide us. It's the bridge that reconnects broken hearts. But compassion is hard, especially when we're the ones who have been hurt. It's easy to feel justified in our anger, in our bitterness, in our desire for revenge. We want to hold on to the hurt, to punish the person who wronged us, to make them feel what we felt. But this kind of thinking only deepens the wound. It traps us in the cycle of pain, preventing us from moving forward. Compassion, on the other hand, opens the door to healing. It doesn't deny the hurt, it acknowledges it, but it chooses to let go of the need for revenge, and instead focuses on bringing restoration. In Ephesians 4:32, Paul urges us, "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you." Jesus' life was a perfect example of this kind of compassion. He reached out to those who were hurting, who were broken, who were rejected by society. He didn't wait for them to change before offering his love. He showed them compassion in their mess, in their failure, and in their need. And this is what we are called to do in our families, to show compassion, even when it's difficult, even when it feels undeserved. Let's think about the way Jesus showed compassion to those who were hardest to love, the Pharisees. The Pharisees were the religious leaders who often criticized Jesus for spending time with sinners and outcasts. Yet even when they opposed him, even when they criticized him, Jesus still reached out to them with compassion. He didn't condemn them. He spoke the truth in love, offering them a chance to repent and turn to him. In Matthew 23:37, Jesus says, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing." Even in the face of rejection, Jesus still showed a heart of compassion toward those who were lost. In the same way, when we show compassion to those who have hurt us, we open the door to healing, not just for them, but for ourselves as well. Compassion doesn't mean excusing the wrong. It doesn't mean pretending that everything is okay when it's not. But it does mean choosing to step into someone else's pain, to see them as a person in need of grace, rather than as an enemy to be defeated. Compassion has the power to soften hearts, to break down walls, and to bring restoration where there once was division. Think about a time when you felt someone's compassion for you. Maybe it was a family member who forgave you after a mistake, or a friend who supported you in your darkest moment. That kind of compassion changes you. It opens your heart. It makes you want to be better, to do better. Compassion is transformative. It's the kind of love that doesn't just heal wounds, it grows relationships. It takes the broken pieces and makes them whole again. But compassion isn't something we can produce on our own. It's something that flows from the love God has shown us. In 2 Corinthians 1:3-4, Paul calls God the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. Just as God has shown us compassion, we are called to show that same compassion to others, especially in our families. The love we receive from God is the love we are meant to extend to others. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it. So today, ask yourself, where do you need to show compassion in your family? Who do you need to forgive? Who do you need to see, not just for their mistakes, but for their need of God's grace? Compassion is the bridge that leads to healing, and when we choose to walk across it, we open the door to renewal. In our families, compassion has the power to transform brokenness into beauty, division into unity, and hurt into healing. And when we choose to live with compassion, we reflect the heart of God to those around us. Number 8. Healing through sacrifice. Have you ever wondered how much you would be willing to give up for the sake of someone you love? We live in a world where self-preservation is often prioritized, where the idea of sacrifice can seem foreign or even unnecessary. When you're hurt, the natural response is often to protect yourself, to shield your heart, and to ensure you don't suffer again. But what if the key to true healing in your family isn't about protecting yourself at all? What if it's about being willing to sacrifice for the ones you love, even when it's hard? What if the path to healing requires laying down your own rights for the sake of others? The concept of sacrifice is central to the message of Jesus. His life was the ultimate example of selfless love. Jesus didn't ask us to do anything he wasn't willing to do himself. In fact, he went so far as to lay down his life for us, the greatest sacrifice imaginable. In John 15:13, Jesus says, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." This is the kind of love that brings healing. It's the kind of love that chooses the good of others above your own comfort, your own rights, and your own desires. When we are faced with deep family hurt, the idea of sacrifice can feel overwhelming. After all, why should we be the ones to sacrifice? Why should we be the ones to make the first move, to give up something for someone else, especially when it feels like they don't deserve it? It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that healing will come through self-protection and self-preservation. But the truth is, healing often comes through sacrifice, through being willing to give up our pride, our sense of justice, our need to be right, in order to restore the relationships that matter most. The story of Jesus washing his disciples' feet is a powerful example of this kind of sacrificial love. In John 13:12-15, after Jesus has washed his disciples' feet, he says, when he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." Jesus, the Lord of all, humbled himself to serve his disciples, showing them that true greatness comes through serving others, especially in the most humbling of ways. His actions demonstrated that sacrifice is not about what we get in return. It's about what we give, and in giving, we receive healing. When we choose to sacrifice for our families, we're following Jesus' example. This might look like forgiving when it's hard, listening when we're tired, or extending grace when we feel like we've already given too much. Sacrifice is about putting the needs of others ahead of our own, even when it feels painful, even when it requires us to let go of something we hold dear. And while it may feel difficult in the moment, the result of sacrificial love is always healing. It's through sacrifice that we break down the walls of bitterness, pride, and anger that can so easily divide us. It's through sacrifice that we allow love to flow freely in our families, healing the wounds and restoring what was once broken. Think about the impact of sacrificial love in your own life. Have there been times when someone made a sacrifice for you, when they gave up their own comfort or desires for your sake? Maybe it was a parent who worked tirelessly to provide for the family, or a friend who stood by you during your darkest hour. These acts of sacrifice leave a lasting imprint on our hearts because they demonstrate the depth of love. Sacrifice makes us feel seen, valued, and cared for. It's the kind of love that heals the deepest wounds because it goes beyond surface-level gestures. It touches the core of who we are. In Ephesians 5:2, Paul urges us to live a life of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. The love of Christ isn't self-centered, it's self-giving. And when we live in that same way, sacrificing for the good of others, our families can experience a transformation. The relationships that seem fractured can begin to heal. The walls of resentment and anger can begin to crumble, and in their place, love can grow. Healing through sacrifice doesn't mean that we ignore the pain or pretend that things are perfect. It doesn't mean that we give up our boundaries or allow ourselves to be taken advantage of. Sacrifice is about choosing to love with an open heart, even when it requires laying down something of value. It's choosing to trust God with the outcome, knowing that He sees the sacrifices we make and that He is working to bring healing through them. In Philippians 2:3-4, Paul challenges us to do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. Sacrifice is a humble choice to put others' needs first. It's about looking beyond our own hurts and considering what might bring healing to those around us. When we are willing to sacrifice, we are choosing to live in a way that mirrors the love of Jesus. But sacrifice doesn't just benefit the person we're serving. It benefits us as well. When we choose to sacrifice for others, we experience the joy of living out our purpose, of reflecting God's love, and of making a lasting impact. We are also healed in the process. Sacrifice doesn't just heal the one we serve, it heals us too. It teaches us humility, patience, and grace. It refines our character and strengthens our faith. Of course, this kind of sacrifice isn't easy. It's not something that comes naturally to us. We're wired to protect ourselves, to look out for our own interests. But when we choose to sacrifice for others, we are allowing God to work in and through us. We are letting go of our own need for control, our own desire for justice, and allowing God's love to flow freely. And when that happens, healing begins to take root in our families. Restoration begins with sacrificial love, the kind of love that Jesus showed us on the cross. So today, ask yourself, where can you make a sacrifice for the good of your family? Is there something you need to let go of to restore a relationship? Is there an area where you can choose to love in a selfless way, even when it feels hard? God is calling you to follow the example of Jesus, to lay down your own rights, to sacrifice for the ones you love, and to allow healing to flow through you. When you choose to sacrifice, you are participating in God's redemptive work in your family. And through that sacrifice, you will experience a deeper, richer healing than you ever imagined. Number 9. Trusting God's timing in family restoration. Have you ever found yourself asking, when will this ever end? When your family is facing turmoil, whether it's due to conflict, distance, or unresolved hurt, it can feel like the process of healing will never come. You may find yourself wondering why things are moving so slowly. Why hasn't the change you prayed for come yet? It's frustrating. You've been patient, you've forgiven, you've worked hard to rebuild, yet the progress seems almost non-existent. And then you begin to doubt, is God listening? Does He care about my family? Will things ever be restored? This is where trust comes in. Trusting God's timing is one of the most difficult but essential parts of the healing process. It's one thing to trust God when things are going well. It's another thing entirely to trust Him when things feel broken, when the healing seems delayed, and when the road ahead seems long. But this is the kind of trust that God calls us to, the kind that doesn't depend on what we can see or feel, but on what we know about God's heart and His faithfulness. The Bible reminds us time and again that God's timing is perfect, even when it doesn't match our own. In Ecclesiastes 3:1 it says, "There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens." When we're waiting for healing in our families, it's hard to see that there is a purpose in the waiting. It's hard to see that there is a season for restoration, even when it feels like nothing is changing. But just like a farmer plants seeds and waits for them to grow, we too must trust that the seeds we're planting, whether it's forgiveness, patience, or love, are growing in God's perfect timing. God has never promised that things will be restored quickly. In fact, his word tells us in Isaiah 55, 8-9, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." When we're in the middle of pain, it's hard to see the bigger picture. We want immediate answers, immediate change. But God sees what we cannot. His perspective is eternal, and he is always working behind the scenes, even when we can't feel it. Think about the Israelites in the wilderness. They were promised the land of Canaan, a place of abundance and peace. But their journey was not immediate. They wandered for 40 years of waiting, of facing challenges, of wondering if the promise was ever going to come to pass. And yet, God's timing was perfect. He used those years to prepare them, to shape their hearts, and to refine their faith. They may have wanted immediate deliverance, but God knew they weren't ready yet. In the same way, when we are waiting for restoration in our families, we must trust that God's timing is shaping us, preparing us, and making us ready for the fullness of what he has for us. In the New Testament, we see this same principle in the life of Jesus. Jesus had the power to heal, to perform miracles, to restore lives. But when he was called to heal Lazarus, he didn't rush to him. In John 11:6 it says, "So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days." And this might seem strange to us. Lazarus was sick. Why wouldn't Jesus rush to heal him? But Jesus had a purpose in his timing. He wanted to show his disciples and the people around him that God's timing is perfect. And when he arrived, he raised Lazarus from the dead, demonstrating that even when it seems like all hope is lost, God's power can bring about the ultimate restoration. This is a powerful reminder for us. When we're waiting for God to restore our families, we need to trust that he's not delayed. He's not indifferent. He's not unaware of the pain we're experiencing. He is working in ways we cannot see, and his timing is always right. It might not be the timing we expect, and it might not be the timing we want, but it's the timing that will bring the most glory to God and the deepest healing to our hearts. In Psalm 27:14, David writes, "Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart, and wait for the Lord." This is the posture we must take in our family struggles, waiting with strength, courage, and trust. We don't wait passively, as if God is doing nothing. We wait with active faith, believing that God is at work, even when we can't see it. Trusting in God's timing means choosing to remain hopeful, to remain faithful, and to continue praying and loving, even when it feels like nothing is changing. It's important to remember that God is always with us in the waiting. In Isaiah 40:31 it says, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." When we trust in God's timing, he renews our strength. He gives us the endurance we need to keep going, to keep loving, to keep praying, and to keep believing that restoration is coming. Trusting God's timing also means letting go of our desire for control. It's so easy to try to fix things on our own. We want to step in and help God, but often what we're doing is delaying the healing process. We want to push things along, to make things happen on our timeline. But when we release control to God, we allow him to work in ways that we could never orchestrate on our own. His timing isn't just perfect, it's better than ours. And when we learn to trust his timing, we experience peace, knowing that he is in control. So if you're feeling discouraged because the healing in your family seems slow, take a deep breath. Trust that God is at work. Trust that he knows the perfect time for restoration. Trust that he sees the whole picture and that he is doing more than you can imagine. It's not about your timing, it's about his. And in his perfect timing, he will bring about the healing you've been waiting for. You don't have to rush the process. Trust him and let him work in his time, because when it comes to healing your family, his timing is the key to lasting restoration. Number 10, teaching by example. The family as a witness to others. Have you ever thought about how your family reflects your values to the world? It's easy to think of family life as something private, something that only matters to those within it. But the truth is, the way we interact with our family members speaks volumes to the outside world. How we treat each other, how we forgive one another, how we show compassion, these actions serve as a powerful witness to the love of Christ. Our families aren't just meant to be a place of love and healing for us. They are meant to be a living example to others of what God's love looks like in action. As Christians, we are called to live as examples of God's grace, and this starts right in our homes. We often forget that our families are the first place where we can put our faith into practice. When the world looks at our families, do they see Christ? Do they see a reflection of the sacrificial love, patience, forgiveness, and grace that Jesus demonstrated? Or do they see a reflection of the same conflicts, frustrations, and misunderstandings that happen in every other family? The way we live out our relationships can either point people to God or turn them away. In Matthew 5:14-16, Jesus tells us, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Our families are the town on a hill. When we choose to love and serve one another in ways that reflect Christ, we shine as a beacon of hope to the world. We don't have to shout about our faith from the rooftops. Our actions speak louder than words. The way we handle our struggles, the way we heal, the way we forgive, this is how others will see the love of Christ in us. Think about the impact of a family that chooses to forgive one another. It's not just healing within the family, it's a witness to those around them. People notice when a family chooses grace over bitterness, when they choose love over anger. This kind of family doesn't just heal itself, it draws others in. It becomes a place where others can see the power of Christ to transform brokenness into wholeness. In 1 Peter 3:1-2, Peter speaks to wives about their conduct in the home, but the principle applies to all of us, regardless of our role. He writes, "Wives, in the same way, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that if any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives when they see the purity and reverence of your lives." Peter is telling us that our behavior can have a powerful impact on others, even those who don't yet know Christ. The way we treat our family members, especially when they are hard to love, can be a powerful testimony to the love of Jesus. When we live according to God's standards, even when no one is looking, we are shining the light of Christ. But this witness isn't just about demonstrating love in good times. It's about showing others how God's love works in the midst of our struggles. Think about how many families have been transformed by seeing another family walk through a trial with grace and faith. People are watching how we navigate the tough moments, how we handle disagreements, how we seek reconciliation, how we hold on to hope even when things feel impossible. It's in these moments that our families can be a powerful witness of God's strength, peace, and love. Consider the story of Job. Job experienced unimaginable loss and suffering. He lost his wealth, his health, and his family. Yet through it all, he did not turn away from God. In Job 1:21, he says, "The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised." Job's faith in God during his darkest moments was a testimony to those around him. Even though his family and friends couldn't understand his suffering, Job's unwavering trust in God became a powerful witness of God's faithfulness. Our families may not be perfect. We all have our flaws, our moments of weakness, and our struggles. But the beauty of living out our faith in our homes is that we don't have to be perfect. We just need to point to the one who is. When we ask for forgiveness, when we choose humility, when we show compassion, we are teaching others, including our children, what it means to live as disciples of Christ. In Deuteronomy 6:6-7, God gives parents clear instructions on how to teach their children His ways. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. This is a call to live out our faith in every moment of life, not just in church or in Bible study, but in the everyday moments at home. Our families are the primary place where we model what it means to live a life of faith. And when we do this, we are teaching those around us, especially our children, what it means to follow Jesus with all our hearts. Our families can also be a witness to the broader community. When we live with kindness, grace, and forgiveness, we show the world that there is a better way, a way that doesn't respond to conflict with anger, but with love. We show the world that there is a hope that transcends the brokenness of this world, a hope that comes from Jesus. In this way, our families become a reflection of God's love, a light in a dark world. As we live out our faith at home, we not only experience healing and transformation within our own relationships, but we also create a powerful witness that others can see and experience. Our families become living examples of God's grace, mercy, and love. And when people see the love of Christ in us, it draws them to Him. Just like the salt and light we are called to be, our families have the power to influence and impact the world around us. So I encourage you today, let your family be a witness to the world. Let your actions speak louder than your words. Let your relationships reflect the love of Christ. And as you do, you will not only experience healing and restoration in your own family, but you will also become a living testimony of God's love to those around you. Number 11, embracing the struggles together. Have you ever felt like giving up on a family relationship? Maybe the arguments seem never-ending, or the hurts seem too deep to overcome. When relationships are strained, it's easy to feel alone in your struggles. It's easy to want to pull back, to isolate yourself, and to pretend everything is okay. But in the heart of Jesus' teachings, we find a different way, the way of embracing our struggles together. Instead of facing challenges in isolation, we are called to face them as a family, with love, grace, and mutual support. Family isn't about being perfect, it's about being together, even when things aren't going well. Jesus' life was a model of embracing struggles, not running from them. He didn't run from the suffering of others. He didn't turn away from those in need. Instead, he entered into the struggles of those around him, offering compassion, understanding, and his presence. This is the same attitude we are called to have in our families. We are not meant to carry our burdens alone. We are meant to bear them together. In Galatians 6:2, Paul writes, "Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ." This isn't a suggestion, it's a command. We are meant to help one another, to share in the weight of each other's struggles, and to walk alongside one another in the hard times. It's easy to want to face life's challenges on our own. We think we can handle it, or we don't want to burden others with our problems. But God's design for family is one of community, one where we come together, supporting and lifting each other up through every trial. Think about the early church. In Acts 2:44-45 we read, "All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need." This is a powerful picture of unity and shared responsibility. The early Christians didn't look at each other as strangers or individuals. They saw each other as a community, a family. They understood that when one person struggled, the whole body struggled. And when one person thrived, the whole body thrived. They embraced each other's burdens, and in doing so, they strengthened their community. In the same way, we are called to embrace the struggles in our families. When someone in your family is going through a difficult time, whether it's a personal issue, a financial strain, or a health crisis, don't try to go it alone. Embrace the struggle together. Offer a listening ear. Offer a helping hand. Share the burden. When we walk through struggles as a family, we are not only strengthening the relationship, but we are also growing together. The challenges become opportunities to deepen our love and our commitment to one another. Of course, embracing struggles together doesn't mean that things will always be easy. There will be moments of tension, disagreements, and frustration. It's easy to want to avoid these difficult moments, but that only pushes the issues deeper, making them harder to resolve later. The key is to embrace the struggles openly and honestly. In Ephesians 4:2-3, Paul says, "Be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace." This isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about facing it together in a spirit of love and humility, with the goal of healing and reconciliation. When we choose to face struggles together, we are living out the example of Jesus. Think about his relationship with his disciples. When they were in the midst of a storm, Jesus didn't stand at a distance and tell them to handle it on their own. He got in the boat with them. He calmed the storm. He was with them through the struggle. In Matthew 14:31, when Peter began to sink, Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him. Jesus didn't let Peter drown. He reached out and pulled him up. This is the kind of support we are called to give one another in our families. We are called to be present, to stand alongside each other in the storms of life, and to help lift one another up when the weight of the world feels too heavy. It's in these moments of struggle that our families can experience the deepest connections, the deepest healing. When we face challenges together, we are growing stronger, not only as individuals, but as a unit. Embracing struggles together also means being willing to forgive. When conflict arises, it's easy to hold grudges, to let bitterness take root. But forgiveness is a key part of walking through struggles together. In Matthew 18:21-22, Peter asks Jesus how many times he should forgive someone who sins against him. And Jesus answers, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Forgiveness is not a one-time act. It's a continuous choice. When we choose to forgive in the midst of conflict, we are choosing to embrace the struggle, not let it define us. We are choosing healing over division. Another powerful example of embracing struggles together comes from the story of Ruth and Naomi. Ruth, despite her own grief and loss, chose to stay with her mother-in-law Naomi, even when it would have been easier to go back to her own family. In Ruth 1:16-17, Ruth says to Naomi, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God." Ruth didn't run away from Naomi's struggles. She entered into them, choosing to walk beside her, to support her, and to be there for her through the hardest time of her life. In the same way, we are called to stay with our family members in their struggles. We don't abandon them when things get hard. We walk beside them, offering love, support, and encouragement. In all of this, embracing struggles together is not about making the pain go away immediately. It's not about fixing the situation in a moment. It's about showing up for each other, standing together through the storm, and trusting that God is working through the process. Healing often takes time, but when we embrace the journey together, we are allowing God to work in and through us, strengthening our relationships and our faith. So today, I encourage you, don't shy away from the struggles in your family. Don't isolate yourself. Embrace the pain, the discomfort, and the challenges, knowing that in doing so you are growing together. Trust that God is with you every step of the way, and that through Him you can navigate any storm. When we choose to face our struggles as a family, we are allowing God to build a foundation of love, trust, and unity that will endure through every trial. Let's embrace the struggles together, knowing that God will use them to bring us closer, to make us stronger, and to bring healing to what has been broken. Number 12, hope for the future. Even in the midst of brokenness. Have you ever looked at your family and felt hopeless? Maybe your relationships feel irreparably broken. Maybe you've been praying for change for years, but things seem to stay the same or even get worse. It's easy to lose hope when things seem beyond repair. But here's the truth. There is always hope for the future, even in the midst of brokenness. God doesn't promise us a life free from struggle, but He does promise us a future filled with hope, even when things seem hopeless. No family is beyond restoration. No situation is too far gone. In Christ, all things are possible. The Bible speaks frequently about hope, especially in the context of suffering and struggle. In Romans 5:3-4, Paul writes, "Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope." Even when we face difficult times, even when the pain feels unbearable, God is using it to build something greater within us, something that leads to hope. Our struggles are not in vain. God uses the brokenness to refine us, to strengthen us, and to lead us to a place where we can experience His love and His restoration in a deeper way. When we're in the midst of family struggles, it's easy to focus solely on the present pain. We see the hurt, the division, the disappointment, and it feels overwhelming. But God calls us to lift our eyes and see the bigger picture. Our present struggles are not the end of the story. The pain we are feeling right now is temporary. God is always working toward restoration, always working toward healing, and He promises that He has a future for us that is full of hope. This hope is not based on our circumstances. It's based on the unchanging faithfulness of God. In Jeremiah 29:11, God speaks a powerful promise to His people, saying, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." Even when the Israelites were in exile, far from their homeland and suffering in ways they never imagined, God reminded them that He had a plan for their future, a future filled with hope. And this promise is for us, too. No matter how broken our families may feel, no matter how distant our relationships may seem, God's plan for our future is good. He is working all things together for our good, even when we can't see it. Hope is not wishful thinking. It's not about hoping for a change in circumstances without any real basis for believing it will happen. Biblical hope is rooted in the promises of God. It's the confident expectation that God is faithful, that He keeps His promises, and that He will bring healing and restoration in His perfect timing. This kind of hope is not dependent on the situation. It is rooted in the character of God, who never fails. Look at the story of Job, for example. Job faced unimaginable loss and suffering. He lost his wealth, his health, and his family. In his pain, he could have given up hope. But even in the darkest moments, Job held on to his belief that God had a purpose for his life. Job 19:25-26 says, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end He will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God." Job's hope was not in his circumstances, but in his Redeemer. And in the end, God restored everything that Job had lost. Job's story is a testament to the fact that even in the darkest times, there is always hope, because God is faithful to bring about restoration. In our families, we may face deep hurt, brokenness, and disappointment, but God's hope is stronger than our struggles. The challenges we face do not define our future. God is still in control, and He is still working in ways we cannot see. He promises to restore what has been broken, to heal what is wounded, and to bring beauty from ashes. Isaiah 61:3 says, "To bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair." This is God's promise to us. Even in the midst of our brokenness, He will make something beautiful. But hope requires faith. It requires us to trust God, even when we can't see how things will work out. It requires us to believe that God is bigger than our problems, that He can heal our families, and that He is working behind the scenes, even when it feels like nothing is changing. It's easy to lose hope when we focus solely on our circumstances. But when we focus on God's promises, we are reminded that our story is not over yet. In Hebrews 10:23, we are encouraged to hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. Until our hope is not in our own ability to fix things, it's in God's faithfulness to bring about what he has promised. We may not see the full picture right now, but we can trust that God is faithful and that he will bring restoration to our families in his perfect timing. Hope also fuels our perseverance. When we hold on to hope, we are able to keep moving forward, even when the road is tough. Hope gives us the strength to keep praying, to keep loving, and to keep working toward healing, even when it seems like we're not getting anywhere. It's the hope of what is to come that enables us to endure the trials of today. In Romans 12:12, Paul encourages us, "Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer." Our hope gives us joy, even in the midst of hardship. Our hope gives us patience when things are hard. And our hope fuels our prayer life as we continue to seek God's healing, believing that he will bring about restoration in his time. If you're struggling in your family right now, hold on to this truth. There is hope for the future. No situation is beyond repair. No relationship is too broken. God is always working, always restoring, and always bringing healing. Keep trusting in his promises. Keep holding on to hope. And know that in time, God will bring beauty from the ashes and restoration from the brokenness. He has a future filled with hope for you and your family, one that is more beautiful than you can imagine. If you've made it to the end of this video, it's because you're someone committed to restoring your family and understanding the power of Jesus' teachings in your relationships. The fact that you've made it to the end shows your determination to apply these principles of love, forgiveness, and grace in your life. Keep seeking restoration, peace, and connection within your family, knowing that every step forward brings healing and unity. Remember, the journey of family restoration is a continuous and rewarding process. Every action you take towards forgiveness, love, and humility strengthens your relationships and brings you closer to the healing you seek. Here on the channel, we help people dive deeper into understanding the teachings of Jesus, bringing wisdom, inspiration, and stories of transformation to guide you in your journey. Comment, "Restoring with Love," so we know you made it here and are committed to this journey of healing and growth with us.